now a message from our sponsor, AARP. Please welcome Nancy Lamond, AARP's Chief Advocacy and Engagement Officer. Nancy?
Thanks, Steve. I'm Nancy Lamond, Chief Advocacy and Engagement Officer at AARP. As part of our mission to empower Americans age 50 plus to choose how they live as they age, AARP is committed to supporting older workers and advocating on their behalf. Right now, that means making sure that older workers aren't left behind as the economy recovers from the pandemic. Almost half of job seekers age 55 plus have been out of work for 6 months or more, compared to around a third of their younger counterparts. Joining me to talk about the challenges facing older workers, the impact on their long-term financial security, and potential solutions are Teresa Ghilarducci, the Bernard L. and Irene Schwartz Professor of Economics at the New School for Social Research, and Jane Oates, President of Working Nation. So let's get to it. The first question goes to both of you. This isn't the first time we've seen it take longer for older Americans to find new jobs after being displaced. It happened after the Great Recession, and the pattern is being repeated today. That points to it not being anything specifically related to the pandemic. Why is it harder for older Americans who are actively looking for work to get hired? And what obstacles and challenges do they face that younger Americans do not? Let's start with Teresa.
There are a number of reasons why typically older workers are, disproportionately in the long-term unemployed. One is that employers tend to view them as more expensive, either because of their salary demands or because of their health care costs. Employers also tend to wrongly not understand that if they invest in older workers that they'll get any kind of return. And just basic age bias reasons. The other reason is that the older worker often has to accept a much lower pay than they had before. So there may be a little reluctance on the older workers, especially if the older workers displaced, to really go from being a welder to a home health care worker. So there could often be these structural problems as well.
Jane.
Nancy, I think it's just that people don't want to pay for experience. Teresa said it. Sometimes the older worker salary is the thing that turns employers off. But it's just baffling to me because every employer right now is hounding us, saying they want people with work history. They want people that can work in a team. They want people that understand work ethic. And that to me is the definition of an older worker.
Jane, you served in the Labor Department in the midst of the Great Recession. Are there specific lessons from that time related to training or supporting older workers and job seekers that you think apply especially today?
Well, I would point out one, and that's doubling down on CSEP. All older workers deserve our attention. And as we were talking about earlier, as we were waiting to start, finally, it seems like they're getting media attention. But there's nobody who needs more attention than those low-income workers who are now in their senior years. So programs like CSEP that we relied on in the Great Recession, I'm really happy to see them getting extra funding right now. And then I would add that right now we're learning that industrial workers particularly have the institutional knowledge that manufacturers and construction trades, they really need their expertise. And smart employers are starting to use them to mentor and teach younger workers as they come in. Let's hope that catches fire.
The Bureau of Labor Statistics says that there are 10.9 million job openings and 8.5 million unemployed people in the U.S. This points to this real mismatch between job seekers and the positions that employers are looking to fill. In light of that, what is the role of upskilling and reskilling programs to help the long-term unemployed get back to work? And how do we make sure that these programs are focusing on the right things and are available to people of all ages? This is for both of you, but starting with Teresa first.
Okay, yeah, but I was going to defer to Jane because I want to hear about what workforce development can do. Someone in the Obama administration told me we could solve almost every problem if the welders would become home health care workers. So we have a situation where you have a mismatch with older people that they've been embedded in their skills in their industries. And there is wildly different projections of employment in different sectors and in others. So that always calls, labor economists would say, training, activist employment policies that we don't even conceive of in this country, where other countries anticipate sectorial changes, anticipate that older people will have a harder time making the match, and just embed it into their system. They don't have unemployment insurance. They have sort of training while you're working. There is also this issue about patriarchal roles and racial and gender stratification. Welders aren't women, and personal home health care workers, we're adding 1 million of those jobs to the economy in the next year, are women. So we have to get by a lot of other barriers, besides skill. But a country that anticipates these sectorial changes and anticipates displacement and recessions could do it. So we have to put on the agenda activist labor policies. Yeah. I have some ideas for that.
Jane?
Yeah, I mean, look, Nancy, this is a perplexing economic situation. The new JOLTS report today says that the number of hires is down. I mean, how can we have all these jobs opening and employers aren't hiring? So I would point to some things that I think definitely, and love Teresa's ideas on this as well. I think the sorting software that HR professionals are using now absolutely works against the long-term unemployed, but I think it also works very specifically against older workers. And we should be calling on employers to stop using that. If there is a shortage, let human beings figure out who the best talent is without looking for buzzwords. And then secondly, I would say that training programs were not built for older workers. They don't recognize their work history. They don't recognize all the things they've learned beyond their academic credentials. So I think we have to really encourage training programs to have an accelerated path for those with a strong work history and accelerate them through, maybe giving them the digital skills or the specific sectoral skills they need for in-demand jobs, but certainly not starting them at square one.
Well, thank you for those specifics. Teresa, your latest report on older workers says that since January 2020, the size of the retired population in the U.S. expanded beyond its normal trend by an additional 1.7 million people. Do you think these retirements are permanent? And if they are, what are the long-term financial implications for someone in their 50s or 60s who's out of the workforce for an extended amount of time, or who retired much earlier than planned?
Right. There are, we usually expect people to withdraw from the labor market during recessions, but this one was much higher than trend. There was also another difference between just about the people who did retire in this recession. Much more likely for older workers without a college degree. And the people who are older with a college degree were more likely to be able to work from home and were not pushed out. And that means going forward, the way you asked the question was perfect. What this means going forward is what I call a tale of two retirements. So for the first time, I'm seeing a real split between the people without a college degree being much more likely to be involuntarily retired. I mean, there's something wrong with that word when we examine the labor statistics, because retired sounds like it's the agency of the worker. But if you probe, you found out that the agent is the employer or their health. It wasn't just a choice to work or retire. So people without college educations are much more likely to retire way earlier than they planned, before they are eligible for Medicare and before they're eligible for even early Social Security. This means that they'll be more in debt based on our projections and the kind of wealth holdings of what people have now, more in debt when they reach 62, 65. They will have drawn down their retirement savings. They wouldn't have built up the retirement savings as much as they had. And they will have some labor market scarring. meaning the longer you're out of the labor force, the harder it is to get back in. So I suspect that they'll just be living at lower living standards than people who are able to stay in the market during this period of time. I recognize how I sound. It's kind of a bummer. So we'll get to policies that will help fix this. But if we don't do anything, we will have this severe inequality in well-being among the elderly in 5-10 years.
Well, thank you both so much for joining today. Really appreciate your time.
Thank you, Nancy. I'm going to remember that a tale of two retirements. This is very big issues we're dealing with.